Rub a copper coin between your palms for 10 seconds, then bring your hands to your face. That sharp metallic smell is not the smell of copper. Copper doesn't smell. You do. Copper changes everything it touches. Your skin was only the beginning. On a countertop, it kills dangerous microbes. Inside your body, it keeps you alive. Thousands of years ago, it changed human civilization. Billions of years before that, it was forged inside dying stars. So, how did copper end up deciding who lived, who ruled, and whether our civilization can keep building its future? Let's start at the beginning. Earth didn't create its own copper. It inherited it from stars that died before the sun was born. Copper was forged inside generations of massive stars, then scattered across the universe by their violent deaths. Massive stars fuse lighter elements into heavier ones, layer by layer, until they reach iron. But iron is a dead end. Beyond that point, fusion no longer produces energy. It consumes it instead, which is generally considered bad news if you're a star.
Oops!
Much of the copper around you was forged billions of years ago, long before the solar system existed. When Earth formed, some of that copper became trapped in its rocky layers, later concentrated by geological processes into striking green, blue, and reddish minerals waiting quietly underground for something to notice it. That something showed up roughly 9,000 years ago when people in what is now Turkey and northern Iraq began working with strange reddish nuggets they found on the ground. At first, they simply hammered native copper into shape. Then someone made a discovery that quietly changed human history. Certain green and blue rocks, if heated hot enough, produced even more copper. Humanity had accidentally learned how to pull metal out of stone. In sufficiently hot furnaces, copper-bearing minerals could be transformed into metal, and once people figured that out, there was no putting it back in the ground. This was not a clumsy stepping stone before real civilization. It was arguably humanity's first real technological leap. In 1991, hikers in the Alps found a man frozen in ice, later called the Iceman, dead for about 5,300 years. He carried a copper axe of remarkably high purity, and isotope analysis traced the ore to central Italy, likely southern Tuscany, hundreds of kilometers from where he died.
Delivery for Ötzi? Already? Oh.
The shocking part was never that prehistoric people had somehow invented a modern refinery. It was that more than 5,000 years ago, someone had mined, smelted, shaped, and transported exceptionally pure copper across enormous distances. Humanity thought copper had already changed everything. It had barely started. Copper alone is fairly soft. Add a little tin, and you get bronze, harder, sharper, better at holding an edge.
Huh? Ooh. That doesn't seem fair. It isn't.
Eventually, tin offered a more predictable solution. Bronze required two separate supply chains, copper and tin, often shipped from opposite ends of the known world. An island in the eastern Mediterranean sat on enormous copper reserves, and every major power in the region wanted access to it, traded with it, or tried to control it. The Latin phrase for it, aeus cyprium, metal of Cyprus, eventually shortened into cuprum.
We need Cyprus. So do we. Looks like diplomacy is over then.
Copper was no longer just making tools. It was deciding which societies could arm themselves and which could not. But that power came bundled with a hidden weakness. In the decades around 1200 BCE, a wave of droughts, invasions, and internal collapse swept the eastern Mediterranean, and the long-distance trade routes for copper and tin were among the casualties. Historians call it the Late Bronze Age collapse. It didn't happen on one convenient afternoon. It unraveled over decades, and while no single cause explains it, disrupted copper and tin supply chains helped deepen the collapse once war and famine had already broken the wider trade network. Turns out, depending on a metal from somewhere else is fine, right up until somewhere else has a bad century. Rome rebuilt the whole operation, just bigger. Mines in what is now southern Spain ran at a scale that still shows up in the geological record. Mining intensified the already acidic, metal-rich chemistry of the region, while dissolved iron gives the Rio Tinto its extraordinary red color even today. Rome was producing so much copper that its pollution reached ice cores in Greenland, 4,000 kilometers away. The Greenlanders had not ordered any. Rome delivered anyway. But copper wasn't only changing the world on land, it was quietly taking over the oceans too. By the 18th century, Britain's greatest enemy wasn't always another navy. Sometimes it was tiny sea creatures drilling holes into wooden hulls and entire forests of barnacles slowing ships to a crawl. The solution turned out to be sheets of copper nailed to the bottom of the ship. Marine organisms struggled to grow on the copper surface, ships stayed faster for longer, and the Royal Navy suddenly spent less time in dry docks and more time controlling the seas. Turns out the world's most powerful navy wasn't protected by bigger cannons, it was protected by copper. For centuries, copper's power looked pretty simple. It built tools, weapons, roofs, pipes, empires. Big, obvious, visible power. Nobody suspected it had a second job, one that had nothing to do with weight or shape or sharpness. During the cholera epidemics of mid-19th century Paris, while the city was dying by the thousand, a French physician named Victor Berck noticed something that made no sense to anyone, including him.
I think I've found something. What is it? Copper workers, they almost never get cholera.
Can you explain why?
No. Come back when you can.
Nobody could explain what Berck had stumbled onto. The cholera bacterium itself wouldn't be identified for another 50 years, so the observation sat quietly for more than a century. Berck had found the right answer. Science just wasn't ready for the question. Modern research never proved Berck's exact statistics. But it did confirm the thing underneath them. Copper surfaces are genuinely hostile territory for many dangerous microbes. Berck didn't have the mechanism. He only had a pattern. A century and a half later, the chemistry finally caught up with him. Set a stubborn strain down on a clean stainless steel countertop, and it can survive there for days, sometimes weeks, waiting for its next opportunity. Put the same microbe on copper, and the countdown has already started. Copper ions rupture the microbe's membrane, jam its proteins, trigger a flood of cellular damage, and damage its genetic material until the cell can no longer recover. Some hospital trials using copper alloy surfaces have reported lower microbial contamination, and in some cases, fewer healthcare-associated infections, though researchers are still working out exactly how much of a difference it makes in everyday clinical use. The same metal that destroys bacteria is also keeping you alive. Every second, your body fights to keep copper within an astonishingly narrow range. Too little and your blood can no longer use iron properly. Anemia sets in. Your hands and feet begin to go numb. Your balance disappears. Your legs slowly stop obeying you. Too much, and copper begins poisoning you from the inside. First the liver, then the brain. Personality changes. Hands begin to shake. Speech becomes difficult. Muscles stiffen. For generations, patients with failing livers, shaking hands, personality changes, and collapsing coordination looked as though they were suffering from completely different diseases. Sometimes they were all symptoms of the same problem: copper escaping the body's control. For you, copper is something your body struggles to control. For an octopus, it's just blood. Your blood is red because it carries oxygen with iron. An octopus solved the same problem with copper. That's why its blood is blue.
Blue blood? Royal family? Obviously.
Octopuses, squid, and horseshoe crabs all use copper instead of iron to carry oxygen. Without it, many of them simply couldn't survive in the cold, oxygen-poor waters they call home. One of them, the horseshoe crab, has been using the same trick for about 450 million years. Long before the dinosaurs appeared, and long after they disappeared. Today, its blue blood still helps protect millions of people by testing vaccines and injectable medicines for dangerous bacterial contamination. Not bad for an animal that looks like it lost a fight with evolution. Then electricity arrived, and copper stopped being just another metal. It became the wiring hidden inside almost everything modern civilization depends on. You can tell how valuable a material really is by watching what people are willing to steal. Copper theft is now one of the most common infrastructure crimes in the world. Power substations, construction sites, streetlights, air conditioners. Entire buildings have been stripped for the metal hidden inside their walls.
Gonna cut this cable. Okay, it'll be fine. All right. I told you so.
Some thieves are electrocuted instantly. Others get away with the copper and leave entire neighborhoods without power. Even hospitals have been affected after thieves targeted nearby copper infrastructure, forcing emergency backup systems to take over. Nobody planned that blackout. Somebody just looked at the price of scrap metal and decided it was worth the risk. That's how deeply copper is wired into modern civilization. In 1858, an American businessman named Cyrus Field decided the ocean needed a wire in it. Not a short one. 3,000 kilometers of copper cable laid across the floor of the Atlantic, connecting Europe and America. Investors thought he'd lost his mind. Expeditions failed, cables snapped, and ships returned carrying very expensive evidence that the Atlantic did not care about investor confidence. Field poured a personal fortune into a wire nobody could guarantee would survive its own installation.
The cable just went dead. Again? Again. How much money is left? Less than there was an hour ago.
Then, in 1866, on the next attempt, it held. A message that once took 10 to 14 days by steamship now crossed the ocean in minutes. Field didn't just lay a cable, he shrank the Atlantic. In 1986, two physicists at an IBM laboratory in Zurich discovered that a ceramic made with copper could carry electricity with no resistance at temperatures nobody thought possible. It was one of the biggest surprises in modern physics, and nearly 40 years later, scientists still don't fully agree on why it works. For 10,000 years, every major technological leap made copper more valuable. Weapons, ships, telegraph cables, electricity, the internet. Copper kept showing up. The green transition may be the first project in history that needs copper faster than we can mine, refine, and recycle it. Try to pull copper out of the modern world, and nothing dramatic happens. It's worse than dramatic. It's structural. Electric motors run on copper windings. Transformers run on copper coils. Generators need it to push power into the grid at all. Water systems, refrigeration, hospital equipment, phone networks, all of it wired together with copper. And so are the factories that would need copper themselves just to build the replacements. The planet isn't running out of copper in the ground. The question is whether we can dig it up, refine it, and ship it fast enough to keep up with what we've already promised to build. An electric vehicle can use 2 to 4 times the copper of a gasoline car. A single wind turbine needs it by the ton. Expanding a power grid needs it by the mile. And opening a new mine doesn't happen quickly. It can take a decade or more before the first useful load comes out of the ground. Meanwhile, a lot of the richest, easiest ore is already gone, leaving behind rock that costs more time and money to process. Recycling helps. Copper melts down and comes back exactly as good as new. But it can only recover metal that already exists somewhere, not the millions of tons the next decade is going to need. Aluminum can step in for some jobs, but it means bigger cables, different connectors, a different set of problems, not a straight swap.
We want a clean energy future.
Great. How much copper does that take?
More than we currently have a plan for.
First, the factories fall behind schedule, then grid upgrades get delayed. Electric vehicles creep up in price. New wind farms sit and wait for cable. Data centers and power utilities start competing for the same copper, sometimes the exact same shipment. 3,000 years ago, a broken copper and tin supply chain helped drag the Bronze Age down with it. Today, we're quietly building a global economy on the exact same metal, and betting the supply chain holds this time. And the supply problem isn't only underground. In some places, that copper comes out of mines with almost no safety rules, no real oversight, and no shortage of people getting hurt to get it out. The green future might be spotless at the wall socket and considerably messier at the source.
The future is clean. Absolutely. Is the supply chain clean? For the presentation, yes.
Ancient civilizations needed copper for elite weapons. This one needs it for almost everything, including the machines built specifically to save it from climate change. And whatever happens to that supply chain next, copper itself has already answered the question of how it plans to survive us. Look at the Statue of Liberty. Her copper skin is less than 3 millimeters thick, and within a few decades of standing in New York Harbor, it turned from reddish gold to green, a shield the metal built directly out of its own corrosion. Concrete cracks. Unprotected steel rusts through. Copper just grows itself armor and keeps standing. Archaeologists still pull copper tools out of the ground thousands of years later, their shape still perfectly recognizable. The same metal that reacts with the oils on your skin can build itself a shield out of nothing but time and air. Copper was forged before Earth existed. It pulled humanity out of the Stone Age, armed the first great powers, connected continents, and quietly wired itself into the machinery of your own cells. Today, if copper stops moving, much of modern life stops with it. It carries the electricity, the data, the equipment keeping hospitals running, and it sits inside nearly every technology meant to save the planet. And we may not have enough of it fast enough. We spent 10,000 years learning how to control copper. Somewhere along the way, it became the thing controlling us. Drop a comment telling us which part surprised you most. The copper inside your own cells, the copper behind ancient empires, or the bottleneck waiting for us in the future. Because honestly, somewhere on Earth right now, someone is stealing copper wire off a hospital wall, and somewhere else, an engineer is trying to figure out how to electrify an entire country with the same metal humans have been fighting over since before the wheel. 9,000 years later, copper still hasn't lost an argument.